Hi, I'm Will.
And I'm Luke.
And this is Will and Luke Discuss,
a vodcast
and podcast
where we discuss content related to psychology,
personal growth,
self-development,
and well-being. This episode, we're discussing
The Wisdom of Insecurity by Alan Watts. Hello, Will, mate. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Thanks. Keen to give this one a crack, and I think be the perfect complement book to Waking Up by Sam Harris, which is a book we've covered in another podcast.
So this book, The Wisdom of Insecurity, published in 1951. Alan Watts was really known for bringing Eastern philosophy to the West, and he did that via public recorded lectures throughout the 50s and 60s and published many books. And I've always found him quite a funny guy. And amazingly, I've just noticed in this intro to the book, he died in 1973.
Oh wow, a lot earlier than I thought.
Yeah. So the book itself, the way I've understood it from the preface is like what it's about, because this is going to be a hard one to talk about, I think. But it's an exploration of the law of reversed effort in the human's quest for psychological security. How's that a first pass?
That sounds great. Yes, and I'd add to that something I wrote down was and his efforts to find spiritual and intellectual certainty in religion and philosophy.
Right.
Yeah.
So that begs the question, doesn't it, of what's the law of reversed effort? The image that comes to my mind is the sword and the stone. If you remember, well, the book or the film.
Yes.
But like the idea of this myth is that there's a there's this sword embedded in rock, and they've got all these strong guys trying to pull it out and they can't. And finally some little kid who does it really gently manages to get the sword out. So that's one metaphor for the law of reversed effort. I don't know what you make of this law.
Yeah, it's obviously a key part of the book, and good we're covering it first. I think a lot of it, what I think he's referring to is that, the harder we try to, push things like fear and anxiety and worry away, the more fear and pain we're going to feel. So, he says, so as long as there's the motive to change our experience and be somewhere else and remove ourselves from where we are and treating ourselves as a separate I to the experience that is going on, will always be susceptible to psychological suffering. And as he goes on, and we'll talk about, he offers solutions to this. So, would say the law of reversed effort, the more we are able to feel pleasure, the more vulnerable we are to pain, is part of his explanation. So he's basically saying that if we struggle with things, we're unable to feel pleasure in the most natural way and live in the most harmonious way possible.
So in this quest for psychological security and certainty, as he puts it, he's kind of saying that we're in a bit of a trap where the more we effortfully try to feel secure and not anxious, and the more we try and be a good person, or the more we try and be a better person, whatever that might mean, we often end up more insecure through the process of forceful effort.
Yes, and also to add to that, I think by labeling experiences as good, bad, indifferent, fearful, positive, negative, we perpetuate these feelings of negativity and fear, as opposed to when we're able to release that and experience these feelings and emotions fully. That's when we're able to have more psychological freedom, and it turns into something else. He says, life moves freely ahead, and we're no longer perpetuating this feeling by thinking that there's an experiencer, we're creating a feeler behind the experience, that there's an I experiencing this, like the separateness that, Sam Harris talks about in Waking Up and those Dzogchen meditations, the non-dualistic mindfulness certainly plays into this, I think.
Yeah. And so he kind of opens by making the case for why well, I know this was published in 1951, but why this era or age were particularly susceptible to this. So I thought maybe covering that might be why this sort of book came out at this time.
For sure, yeah.
And he talks about how, like, in the past, we were able to cling to God and organized religion, but and that always promised eternal order and an afterlife. And so even though we were clinging and to some degree striving for the future, that the myth, if you like, worked until the Enlightenment, a sort of scientific revolution, and then all these seeds of doubt were sown in, and, like, I don't know, you have what they call the death of God via Nietzsche's idea that if God dies because of the Enlightenment, because we can't quite believe in the same way we used to, we're going to be left with this, like, meaningless nihilism potentially. And I suppose Alan Watts is saying a similar sort of thing, but now because we can't quite really believe in those stories in the way we used to, we're clinging for much lesser, we're not clinging for future and an afterlife, but we're clinging for, a better life next week, next month, next year, always striving to, I don't know, earn more money or get enough experiences to be living my best life, to be striving to have some other ideal. And that makes us, I don't know, it's like we're on this hamster wheel, always like trying to get more.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. That's my pass at that.
Yeah. No, interesting. Yeah. I think, you've explained that really well, especially the part about, kind of the religious aspect and how that's kind of dropped off and what we're searching for these days. And I think what the bit that stood out to me in that Age of Anxiety is that he's saying that human beings are only happy as long as they have a future in which they can look forward to. And we're sort of the anticipation of a good time or pleasure or some sort of release, and not being where we are now is something that we look forward to, and we get frustrated because that future never comes. And
right. And even if it does, and this is how time leads into our suffering, right? Because even if it does, we have so little practice at enjoying the present moment that even when we get everything we want, we're not very good at being with it and enjoying it, because we've like habitually addicted to planning for the future, ruminating about the past, etc.
Well, that's what he says, is that this possibly in another chapter, that the past, which is dead, and the imagined future become more real to us than the present moment. Like we're very fixated in comparing the present moment to a previous experience or to a desired future, and with that in mind, with that kind of striving and constant comparison, we can never truly be here, present now, and enjoying the moment. And I think he makes a really great comparison that when you're in a happy, joyful moment, and you're just kind of totally present, you're not thinking about how this could be better in the future or what's happening tomorrow, and then you're not comparing it to something that's happened yesterday. But he's saying for more negative experiences, we don't tend to do that. That's the moment we start to move away from experience and create that division, looking elsewhere. And he says, I guess jumping to the solution is saying that you need to be with it entirely through the more positive and negative experiences, although he would move away from labeling it as such.
Right.
I think that's an interesting point.
So we might all have experiences of like flow and pleasure and positive, where we are actually present, and we can probably all relate to finding moments like that in our life or week, hopefully. But he's saying that we're much less likely to do that when we're suffering. When we're suffering, we're far more in planning, ruminating, and we would do just as well to stay in flow with our suffering than as when we're having pleasant times.
Is there anything else from that part, pain and time, that stood out to you? I noticed in your notes, you highlighted the bit around the real problem does not come from any momentary sensitivity to pain, but from our marvelous powers of memory and foresight. In short, from our consciousness of time.
Yes,
and then there was an example about the man about to undergo surgery.
Oh yeah,
Explain that maybe in the context of this.
Well, he just used the example of, imagine a man had surgery booked in I don't know when it was, let's say a month's time, and in the intervening, like, he knew that was going to happen, that was all agreed, there was no debate about that, and in the intervening month he wasn't experiencing any pain, life was good, other than the fact he knew he had this operation coming up, but he ended up suffering throughout it, just worrying about this operation that's going to happen and what the consequences of it might be. And I thought it just highlighted the sense of how that worrying about the future can create suffering, and what otherwise might even be a pleasant present.
A pleasant present, yes. I think, I saw you wrote, said his power to enjoy these things, so life as it is, as you described, is taken away by constant dread. So I think he's painting a really great picture at the beginning of this book around what gets in the way of having a pleasant and present now. There's all these things that we can fuel the more negative, whether it's mindset or we perpetuate negative, frustrating, irritable patterns within us by constantly striving to be somewhere else other than we are. And I guess there's a bravery in sitting through all experiences. And I guess it's maybe hard for us to speak as him, but the way he articulates this, especially if you hear him with audiobooks and lectures he does, there's a real lightness to the way he describes this, of describing life as join the dance of change, plunge into it. Don't get so frustrated if our ideas don't match up to the world that presents itself to us. That's kind of the source of our insecurities, that we're not willing just to kind of go with the flow of life. And it's not kind of like these experiences are happening to us and directly impacting us and frustrating us. It's kind of we're one and the same with these frustrations, and we can, I think there's a metaphor he said around, I think I'm probably better off reading it out if that's all right. Because I feel like so it says, if you look carefully, you'll see the consciousness. The thing you call I is really a stream of experiences, of sensations, thoughts, and feelings in constant motion. But because these experiences include memories, we have the impression that I is something solid. And still, like a tablet upon which life is writing a record, yet the tablet moves with the writing finger and the river flows along with the ripples, so that memory is like a record written on water. So I think that's probably a better way of describing that flow and dance I was trying to express. Nice. Anyway, there's a few of my ideas. I just threw them all out in one go, but there you go.
Well, I think some of these quotes highlight how this book is much more an experience than it is chapters of information or like strategies or anything. It was almost like a meditation to read the book rather than which makes it harder to sort of riff on and talk about. But I very much enjoyed reading it as a meditative exercise.
Yes, I think as well, like the times we've listened to Alan Watts, the first time we did, we were kind of on a car ride listening to a lecture of his, and that sense of treating life as play and as a dance. There's something experiential around that. Like, you can see things differently. And I think from reading this, I guess as we go on is, this is encouraging a perspective change or encouraging a new way of living. That's, I guess, challenging to talk about in a podcast sense, unless you can experience that yourself. But I guess we're here to share our experience of that, and the things we enjoyed. So, something a bit different for us, I guess.
One I want to, before we go much into that solution, another thing I wanted to talk about was this idea that, so we've got our clinging to the past and the present as a way to perpetuate suffering, which is one trap we can fall into. And with the loss of religion, that can be even, we can lose meaning and have even more suffering. But he says another strategy some of us have for that is to try and numb our negative feelings.
Yes.
Literally with drugs and alcohol, or sort of figuratively, or more psychologically through suppression and repression. And when we do that, he calls that like a spiritual, psychological suicide, because when we push all, like when we try and just get rid of and have an internal hostile attitude towards our negative feelings, that's where he's talking about the sensitivity. You can't just get rid of negative feelings. Once you repress everything, and you just dumb sensitivity across the board, which means you're no longer free to enjoy pleasure as much. And he gave a sort of example of, he gave a few examples, but one was like a stuffy academic who was so up in his head and just had pushed all feeling to one side and sort of serious. And there's sort of a few character styles that can come out of this, or the like tough guy who sees any expression of emotion as weakness, and that sort of character style. So a few examples there. But that another not very successful solution we have to this problem is to numb and push away.
I think maybe to add on to that, in the chapter of the wisdom of the body, he's saying that we often exist only for the future brain. So the opposite to numbing, we can overstimulate ourselves. So we kind of crowd our minds, we busy ourselves with distractions, as you're saying. And he says we tend to stimulate our senses until they build a tolerance. So he's saying over time, if we're constantly moving away from experience and not allowing ourselves to feel it, and filling life with all these kind of short-term pleasures, and kind of doing things for the future brain. So I'll do this, then I'll feel good. He's saying we rely on superficial hopes and assurances as well. So we kind of put these things in place in order that we feel better at a future time. And also we're doing things that numb ourselves and shut ourselves off from those emotions, like putting those walls up and not experiencing it fully.
Or he talked about like, not just for future times, but like, because you feel like this might be a rare opportunity to have that thing. So even if you're not that bothered about it now, you still overindulge in it because you can, and because it's present now. So he even talked about sex as like, yes, although you could think that's one of the most natural things to do, we can get into that state where we can be so obsessed or see it as such a rarity that if we just get the opportunity, we might do it, but we don't really want to if we were really listening to our body in that moment. And then he said that can lead to things like impotence and so even like, I'm trying to think of other examples like that, where like just because you have the opportunity for something, you might grab it because you see it as something a future self might want, or you have wanted in the past but not been able to get in that moment. And actually you're still not listening to yourself now. And then that's another way we overindulge and decrease our sensitivity to life.
Overindulge, I think, is that's a good word to summarize what you're saying, for sure. I feel like you would have liked the chapter on the wisdom of the body. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. I've got some things that I found interesting, but I know I know we've spoken before about maybe some of your meditation practices, how you tend to enjoy ones that kind of incorporate more bodily sensations, and be interested to hear what you think.
So now I feel like we've gone from sort of naming the problem, seeing some unsuccessful solutions to that problem, and now I feel like very ready to enter the territory of like what Alan Watts is kind of actually selling in this book, right? Which is the being present, the noticing the illusion of the I and the ego. But the wisdom of the body, hey. Well, I'll just read my notes to tune myself in, that were that we're living for symbols and the future. We have a conflict between I versus me, and we miss the natural, organic, bodily wisdom and rhythms. Like a pounding heart, a self-conscious mind isn't working properly. When we attune to the present and the real, the mind works instinctually. So, okay, I did like that bit. He talked about how that we have certain cues for when our body's not working properly, right? So if we're, I don't know, having a panic attack, we might notice our breath short and our heart's pounding. And that's obvious to us in that moment that something's not right, especially if we're not really in any immediate danger.
Yeah.
But he said the way our mind gets obsessed with planning and ruminating future and past is that if there's a very similar cue, but we don't quite see it the same way. We it's not immediately obvious to us that that's our mind that's not quite doing what it should. So I really liked that highlighting. And yeah, so I'll give an example that this brought up for me then. I feel like I've been on a transition with the way I exercise. I very much in the past have made a plan to do certain workouts because I feel like it's good for me. And I'm very much like, I should do this because it's good for me. I schedule it in. And then I've got this conflict where oftentimes I don't feel like it, I don't want to. And then I'm like, crack the whip. I force myself to do it. I do it anyway. I can feel like sort of good about that, as if I'd been like, well done. You stayed militant. But it doesn't really work for me as a long-term strategy, because eventually the me won't follow what my eye is telling me to do. But on that path, I suppose I found that actually there is very real like physiological benefit I can feel from exercising when I exercise at certain times in the right way. Like if I've had a long day at work and I've had lots of screen time and my eyes are kind of stinging, actually working out, getting a sweat on, and how I feel after that can feel very like relieving and pleasant. And if as I've learned to listen to that response, I've found that I've started to crave exercise at certain times where I know my body would like that feeling that it gets.
Okay, nice.
And then suddenly, if you can tune into that sense, it becomes like this positive feedback loop where you find yourself wanting to exercise to get the payoff that I didn't used to be attuned to. But the more I've listened to myself, the more I've been able to, from the outside, it might look like the same result. I might look like I'm exercising the same amount, but I'm not doing it in a battled way. I'm doing it in a way that it fits the rhythms and the desires and what does he call it? The great stream. I'm going with the flow.
Yeah. Nice. I guess it's sort of it sort of jumps over the need for motivation as well, or having external motivating factors such as your plan or your diary, or blocking out a certain time to do something. You're probably relying more on what do you call it, like internal motivation. You're sort of like, this feels like something I want to do, so I'm going to do it. Like, it's nice to,
if I was going to be, sorry to jump on that, but I'd be really nitpicky about that, I would call it intrinsic motivation. And like, because actually in a way you could argue, well, my original motivation was kind of internal because I've internalized it, but I've internalized these external things. I've internalized like the idea of what a healthy person does. And they were externals, and they are still kind of extrinsic, but it's not like someone else is telling me to go to the gym, right? So it's not external in that sense, but they're these, I suppose in psychotherapy, we call them like introjects, like these things we've taken on from the outside. They've become a sort of pseudo part of us, but they're not really intrinsic. They're not in line with our true self.
I'm loving this example. It's really good. I think, it's really cool. I think there's a I guess, a quote that's like screaming out at me everything you're saying, and it might kind of sum up what you're experiencing from his angle. So it's saying we've been taught to neglect our bodies and put faith in our brains. We have lost instinctual wisdom. We are at war. The brain desires things the body doesn't want, and while the body desires things the brain does not allow.
Brilliant.
So
I think that was one I highlighted. That's I remember that quote quite clearly.
Yes. And I think, he's saying it's easy for us, especially now. I'm thinking, particularly with technologies, it says, we tune in more to pleasure and distractions, more and more like things that distract and stimulate us, but don't have the rewards quite low. Like, so you're describing like that feeling post-exercise, that experiential sort of whatever it is, like however you'd best describe it. Whereas nowadays,
sort of like a glow, like calm tingling. Even if I'm tired, it's like a nice tired.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you kind of reassociate the tiredness with something else. But I guess we're going for more. Society is more susceptible, maybe, to more shallower desires and more shallow distractions, as opposed to more wholesome, body-oriented ones. He does make a comment on what the brain is for. So he says, our logical brain thinks we can cut away from our finitude, but he says that the function of the brain is to serve the present and real, not to send man chasing wildly after the phantom of the future. So I guess he's paying homage to and respect to the mind for its, I guess, some of its problem-solving capabilities potentially, or its ability to manage the present moment with maybe stored information that we have. I'm not sure. He's maybe landing on this perfectly.
Credit that we don't need. That sort of conscious and effortful planning and problem solving maybe has its place, but our mind has its problem solving capacities without doing it that way as well.
Yeah,
I suppose it's something that's more obvious, a skill that you've so embodied that it doesn't require thought anymore. Like, I don't know, playing something on the guitar that you've played 100 times before, or I don't know. I in Malcolm Gladwell's Blink, he talked about like people that just have an eye for sculptures because they've just been in the industry so long that they can tell a fraud like that, but they couldn't tell you exactly why they know it's a fraud. They just know on some level.
Interesting.
It's like that sort of more gut level, instinctual thing.
Interesting. So that's some, I guess, solutions, I suppose, to this anxiety.
I have more. I know you
got some more.
Well,
yeah, go.
Already,
I'd love to hear more. Yeah.
You've already kind of named them, but I feel like they're so important. They deserve more time. So one is this idea of how we symbolize everything. So it's not just, we've talked a lot about past and future, but even in the present, the way we chop up the world into bits of thought, and like almost instantaneously I see, like screen, plant, chair, like we project, but the only way I know these concepts is because I've learnt them in the past, right? So we're constantly projecting stuff onto the world that is of symbols of language that we've learnt in the past, and that's almost like a barrier to actually experiencing things in and of themselves. And there's a sort of security in being able to label everything and knowing what everything is, but you actually miss the like the uniqueness of the real, I don't know, this is where we just start losing words, right? The tangible, the real, the unique moment of any given moment. This actually came up in one of the Jordan Peterson books we read, where he talked about how even though he's lived maybe in that current house he was in when he was writing the book just as long as his childhood home, he could like describe the cracks in the street of his childhood home, like the different like shapes of the bricks on the walls opposite his house. Because when you're a kid and before you've built all these symbols and before you just put everything into a box, you're more prone to take in the real experience. Whereas if I can just label something street, bus stop, wall, I don't really take it in. I've just projected a past concept onto it, and I've just chucked it in the bucket with all the other bus stops, walls and pavements I've ever seen. And you sort of live in a kind of low resolution fantasy of your own creation rather than being present.
And is he saying the way out of that is to stop labeling and stop putting expectations on things, or is there a way we can, I don't know, better absorb the world at all? Is there like a solution from that? Or?
Hearing you say stop has me think of like, that's part of that effort, right? Like, oh no, I'm doing a bad thing. If I was a better, more spiritual person, I wouldn't be projecting these labels. I think it's more about noticing, just being aware of as it's happening, and like choosing to pay attention to the now, and whether that's labeling, and what out of that is sensation, and what out of that is thought, and what out of that is labeling and fantasy, and just being aware, I think is the twiddling of the sword rather than the forcing of it. Thinking, oh no, it's bad. I'm thinking about the future again. Like, I'm terrible at this mindfulness nonsense.
Something, and possibly unrelated, but something I've been trying to do a bit more this year is when I'm in an experience, stop. Here we go again. Trying not to add a running commentary to what I'm doing, or put an expectation on it, because it kind of takes me away from the here and now. Like exactly what he's saying. You know, if I'm going like, if it was this, then this might be better, or this is almost as good as that other sushi I had last week. And I feel like I notice it when I'm surrounded by people who are constantly expressing being elsewhere, or like comparing, or expectations. Like, I guess I was with someone recently, kind of down at the beach, or in the water, like, this would be perfect if it was a bit more sunny. I'm like, this is already beautiful, like I guess it was it's not a criticism, it's just something I noticed that like I find that unhelpful. I think it's a message he put in this book as well, like that running commentary, like stop. You're not doing that when you're fully aware and fully present in the moment. You're not constantly comparing.
True. Yeah. And then just to build on that, so there's the commentary itself, and then there's the deepest or ultimate symbolizing, which is I. So the symbol of this sense of identity of who I am. And so with that running commentary, part of what makes that so almost invisible, even though it can be ever present, is the sense that we identify with it. Like, it's not just like a radio that's over there, that's someone else's babble. It's like it's like, that is me. That's who I am.
Yeah.
I think you've already named this earlier, but that sense that because rather than, if I have a memory, rather than seeing it as a thought image that's in the present, but actually seeing it as some representation of the past and me in that past, and being able to compare me in the past with me in the present, it's like the thing that survived all that feels like a constant, and I identify with that, and I call it I. That's how I suppose symbolize this ego or whatever, and that's
it gives us psychological continuity, right?
Exactly.
There's a memory of I. Yeah.
But this is the thing so this is like the ultimate symbol. I talked about, I could symbolize the screen or the plant or the chair, but the ultimate symbol is the I. And he's saying that the closer we look at that, the more we find that too is just a projection. It doesn't really exist in the way we feel it does.
Wow. Heavy stuff, isn't it? Nice. All right, cool. I reckon I think it might be good to push on and look at some of the other solutions that are available and what he suggests. I think the chapter on being aware. So he's saying we need a method and course of action. So he says awareness of life without any judgments or labeling. False impressions are removed by awareness. Adding labels prevents awareness. We need an undivided mind and don't be separate from experience. So, kind of instead of trying to, it's kind of similar to what we've been saying before, but, saying, the more we seek security, the more insecure we feel. The more we try to escape the pain, the more pain we feel. The more you struggle to escape, the more you inflame the pain. You are afraid and want to be brave, but the effort to be brave is fear trying to run away from itself. You want peace of mind, but the attempt to pacify it is like trying to calm the wave with a flat iron. So I think he's yeah.
Sorry, do you mind if I?
You go. There's two quotes that I like that can kick us off. Yeah.
Well, so I just talked about this symbolization of identity that we call I or the ego, and that's this thing that we try to defend and protect and make secure, and we make sure that it isn't wrong in an argument or whatever. But by building defenses in trying to secure our sense of identity, we actually wall it off and make it more separate from others in the world.
Yeah,
which then leads us to feel more sort of isolated, alone, and separate from the rest of existence. And I suppose he's saying that if we notice there is really no I, we start to identify not just with this symbol of who I am, but we identify all of our sensations. We identify with all of it. And like if my sensations in this moment includes you and the sky, then I start to feel at one with the universe and at one with everything, because I don't have this symbolized identity of the I or ego that I'm protecting. And so suddenly everything is kind of a part of me, because I can only experience, well, everything I experience is unity to some degree.
And how he's saying during negative experiences, that's when we typically create that divide,
right? That
we're not kind of one with everything, but we're separate to these things and they are affecting us directly.
Right. Because I can escape the fear, or I can try to escape the pain, or trying to defend myself from you or whatever it is.
And, he says our minds only work their best when we are not constantly re-stimulating our inner effort to get away from it. Pain thrives in tension. I think that's interesting, thinking about how, well, kind of what you're saying is that we will perpetuate negative patterns and negative mindsets and psychological suffering by re-stimulating them, by identifying too strongly with the stimulus as opposed to experiencing it as it is. And I guess these are quite, I guess there's a whole, religions and philosophies and a whole world of work in trying to explain that very simple concept, I suppose. But it's, it's an interesting one to carry out. I feel like it's something I need to remind myself of on a daily basis when something feels you too easily identify with a negative experience. This is the exact sort of advice you need to kind of like step back and get perspective. And I guess even using that language, stepping back and perspective in itself implies that there's a you that needs to step back. But I can see how there's often like there's just like so many different metaphors. You just got to wait for one to land and be like, yes, that's the one. That's the one that feels right to me. Yeah.
Right. Because there ultimately is no, like, he talks about this as well, any language you use, you've already started to symbolize everything and put it in boxes. So like it's already too late. To some degree. So you can only find ends through metaphors that sort of land or click or. Yeah.
I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts were, whether you could just explain a bit more about when he says that, the mind has the power to be a shock absorber. So it has a bit of give in it. And he describes it like water or a cushion. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So I had something in my mind on the back of what you just said before that, which is, that this labeling and symbolizing we've been talking about. So let's say I have an experience now and I tell myself it's anxiety. Well, as soon as I've said that, it's now in the box of anxiety, and it's like, just like the box of chair, it may as well be the same as every other chair or every other anxiety. But I'm missing, by doing that, I'm missing the actual here and now experience, which, although it might be comparable, it's actually unique. And then of course I tell myself that this box of anxiety is now a bad thing, and I have to find a way to, push it away or drown it out or whatever. But by getting to it before I label it, I can actually tune into what it really is. This next heartbeat, this twist in the stomach, this shortness of breath, whatever. And again, to even describe it, I have to now put more words to it. But
yeah,
in that experience, I wouldn't necessarily be labeling it. I'd just be noticing the sensations and the experience and the thoughts. And I suppose in doing that, he's saying that there's a natural flow to life that will, whatever that experience is, will change. You don't have to push it or beat it or drown it. But actually, by doing that, you're almost fixing it in place by doing that. And actually, just by listening to what it is, without judgment and labels, it will naturally flow. It might not necessarily just get pleasant straight away, but change is inevitable.
Yes, yeah, and in that sense of he says, like, don't be rigid, be stable and absorb it. And I think that's I guess a useful metaphor. And I think it's true. I guess when you think back to experiences, you had maybe, I don't know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, like, that probably felt really real and scary or worrisome or whatever. Like, they moved on. Like he says, the transitoriness of life is the beauty of it. Like, there's something beautiful about the fact that things kind of move through you and change naturally. And I imagine if most people reflect, or I certainly know myself reflect, like, the more you struggle with these things, the more difficult you make it for yourself, and it can perpetuate the struggle. So nice. Yeah, I think it's a useful metaphor, just to kind of allow. And it's probably one of the most difficult things to do, but it also sounds like it's a habit that you can learn, or a skill that can be developed to get better at just sort of sitting with discomfort or difficult emotions.
Yeah Nice.
And also on top of that, he says that there's more depth to life as well. Like, it's kind of what you were saying, like, if you're labeling things, you're putting them in a box, like, this is anxiety. Whereas if you just kind of sat with it, there's a whole, I guess, myriad of sensations and ideas. And, it says, give our minds space to be silent and form new words, so there's and back to the wisdom of the body, like, there's a wisdom in that experience, like, it's telling you something, like something is in there. And if you listen, you could derive some useful information from that, together. as opposed to prescribing it or describing it as a certain experience based on prior, like, oh, I've had anxiety before, so this must be anxiety, or I've, you're not giving it a chance to be something new. And I guess in a way, life could be more joyful if you're experiencing new things and seeing things fully. Yeah.
Because the more you let in, it's about that sensitivity thing you talked about at the beginning. We are sensitive creatures, and we can try to numb things by, boxing them, labeling them, pushing them, but then we desensitize to everything. And I liked it. He says something like, if you're constantly thinking or talking, the only thing you have to think about are thoughts. Like, whereas if you actually have a break from that and you can experience raw experience, sensation, you can then have new things to think about.
Yes, yeah. I found that a bit funny too. Yeah. I was interested again in another part of the book. What's it? Chapter 7, the transformation of life. So he's saying to make proper plans and have a vision, we need to understand life as it is, of what we are and what we are doing. So I think he's saying here we must have a healed vision of life from a place of full awareness in order to, I suppose, make the most wholesome decisions for us. And know, once we know we aren't split, there's not kind of a separate I and me, it must have influence over our actions. Otherwise, we're in constant frustration and tension. I'd be really keen to hear what your thoughts are on this, particularly around sort of, making life choices and making changes and making decisions.
Okay. I can tell you how I interpreted it.
I read the quote and then you have to.
The way I interpreted this was he was saying that, sometimes, especially Americans, we like, when he spent a lot of his time in America, even though he was English, but we like to be practical people. We like to do things. We like to get things done. And then he was saying, well, you can't, getting things done without a theory makes no sense, because what you're getting done, well, it's like if you've got no vision, then he says something like, it's just like you're walking around in a fog. Like I say, okay, so before doing, and we need some sort of vision, some sort of theory. But he said we can't form that vision whilst we have a divided mind, whilst we feel like there's an I that's separate and alone from the rest of the universe. Or we can, but it will form a contradiction. What we want will be in contradiction with reality. So then he goes to, well, if I can see that I'm this interwoven process with the rest of the universe, like ultimately we're all, even from a scientific perspective, like we're all stardust. We've all come from the same place. We've all grown out of rocks. Like we're not, we are actually one, even on a scientific level, not on some woo level, but it's not like we've all come here from separate universes. We've grown from the same stuff, or one thing. And that when when we actually feel that, rather than just see it conceptually, we start, that can shape our, I suppose, desires or motives in a way that are more what you might call pro-social, or more like, I wouldn't just, if I can really see that, then why would I care just to earn millions of pounds for myself at the expense of running a business that, I don't know, pollutes the atmosphere or something? Because if I'm identified with that atmosphere as well, that would just be a contradiction to me. Whereas if I'm this separate ego, my goals might involve things that protect the ego, this at the expense of other people, everything else around me. So he's saying only really when we feel that I am you, you and I, I'm one with everything, that my motives will actually be coherent. That's the way I interpreted it.
I really like that. Lovely experience. Lovely experience to hear you say that. Oh, thank you. Thanks. Yeah, I think what about you? What about me? Well, it sounds like it's like a framework or a way of reminding yourself when making life choices. And I guess it does go to links in with some kind of like Stoic principles around, accepting death as another moment. So, and accepting our finitude. So kind of bearing that in mind during your decisions. So maybe might be a bit helpful when taking risks, or if you're making decisions based on what other people will think of you, If you're worried because you think that other people won't like you for that decision, or that you'll be unpopular, or you won't look cool, then it's at that point it might be worth questioning, am I focusing too much on the ego, the sense of I that could be damaged by this?
Right.
It obviously would help inform those sorts of decisions.
So where you're kind of trying to defend or run or escape ego damage, but in doing so, you're missing out on opportunities, life experiences.
How did you go with the last couple of chapters? I feel like I've spoken about all the parts that interested me. Is there anything else you wanted to add at all, or any final thoughts? Feelings?
Yeah, so the one on morality, I feel like was led on really nicely from that. So he kind of spelled out how, in quite funny ways, how morality is often practiced, and it's like when we're this divided mind, when we're this I and me, in the same way that as an individual I might be trying to whip myself into shape to be a good person or a better person, despite my baser urges and motives that want to do separate things from what the I is telling it to do. That's also happening on a societal scale, where we see where morality is seen as kind of like something that's preached, and then we reward and punish based on people being good and bad. So that is, I suppose, that what we just talked about, that transformational life thing, but on a societal level. And now I'm just trying to speak whilst thinking what he suggested the alternative was, but I've not caught up with myself enough, so maybe you can help me out.
That's okay. Yeah. So I actually I stole a few of your notes, so I might be able to help you here. So saying so when I feel ashamed that I amount to nothing, and so I begin to practice humility because of my wounded pride, and charity because of my self-love. He says the urge is to make I amount to something. I must be right, good, a real person, heroic, loving, self-effacing. I efface myself in order to assert myself, and give myself away in order to keep myself. Jesus. The whole thing is a
like
contradiction.
Spiritual pride, right?
Yes, spiritual pride. Okay, yeah.
I'm trying to be a good person for my ego. I suppose it's a similar thing to what we talked about, whereas I suppose what he called the chapter creative morality, a more creative approach to morality is that so like, let's say I could see someone who, let's say there's some guru, right? And they have transcended their ego, and their motives are sort of aligned with a pro-social way of being, such that they effortlessly act in ways that are not harmful or malevolent, because they haven't got this encapsulated defensive ego, where he's kind of saying that most of what we might consider evil in the world would come out of this divided mind, come out of this ego defense. And actually, that answer of whipping the ego into shape, or using punishment and reward to force it to do what you want, well, for one, it kind of undermines the whole premise of morality, that we have any free will anyway, because you're basically saying we can just be shoved around like pawn pieces. But back to that example. So let's say there's this guru, right? He's transcended his ego, and I'm looking to him to be like, I want to be like that. So I start copying him. But he's saying this isn't something you can copy, because in doing that, it's like I'm still trying to, in my spiritual pride, trying to make I a better person by being like that over there, right?
Yes.
And he's saying it's more that like that's the great stream of life. If we have noticed that this I is some sort of an illusion, and we are present, our motives will naturally be more pro-social and like not wanting to damage life and the environment and other people, because it just aligns with what we're identifying with, which is everything we experience.
Nice. These are some really, like, I guess, quite heavy ideas in a lot of ways. Yeah. But I guess it does boil down to some relatively kind of like simple ideas too around, like living life fully and completely, and being in this moment now, and experiencing it to the full. Not fleeing, not running towards. It's an experiential read. I definitely enjoyed it. It was one it was almost one that's like, knowing we had to do a podcast on it sort of changed the way I experienced the book. So I was like, I want to remember some things to talk about. Yeah. But I imagine if I read it without having this conversation in mind, maybe I'd have embodied it differently. I guess that's always a thing with doing these books with you, is like, how do we balance sort of the key takeaways? I don't want to forget them, but also I want to experience them at the same time. And maybe by, I don't know, writing them down, I take myself out of the moment, because I'm sort of adding I'm adding a label, an impression to metaphors and experiences. And I guess just a final, reflection for me is that, like, when I'm experiencing something, whether that's a book or a movie or anything else, it's like, do I need to worry about trying to remember it later, kind of capturing a moment, or is there something in that? I'm not sure if I'm landing on anything here, but there's something there. Yeah. Well,
I think I've got a good metaphor for that. Whereas, like, let's say you're at a lecture where what you're being offered for you really is just information. Then you might, and let's say it's not being recorded or whatever, you might be likely to take notes as the lecture's happening, and that might be of some value to you. And that would be like akin to us reading a book that was more informational. But if you were at a gig listening to music, you wouldn't, like, in trying to write a review about the gig as it's happening, you'd just be taking away from the experience of being there, right? And a book like this does feel like he's trying to not just give information, but he's trying to offer you an experience through reading it. So there's certainly something by trying to capture it at the same time that you might miss something. I definitely relate to that.
All right. Nice to chat to you, mate.
Cheers, mate. Take care.
That's it.
Bye.